So good evening and thank you for joining us and welcome to the second of our 2025 series of presentations about the Marmotte. This is Marvin and I'm here to present your training plan and how you should train for the best for basically the 3 months between now and the last couple of weeks when you'll be tapering. So first of all, quick reminder of the series of presentations. I made our first presentation on part 1 of the training plan on the 5th of December, and that's now available on YouTube in the Alpine Cols channel if you want to review it. Today I'm presenting part 2, and then on the 5th of June, I'll present hints, tips, strategy, and tactics for getting your best result on the day. So that's always a popular one, and that's worth watching, I believe. Now, before getting into the meat of it, let me take 30 seconds to talk about our pre-race coaching camps. All of these are designed to help you get your best result at your target events, whether it be the Marmotte or any other mountainous one, of course. The next one of our camps is in Corsica in April for 7 days of endurance riding in the mountains in Corsica. Should be great weather in April there. The one after that is in Savoie in the Alps in June. And this one includes a full reconnaissance of the Étape du Tour. And it finishes, of course, just a week before the Marmotte. So that gives you a week to recover, which is enough for most people. For details, if you're interested, if you want details, please go to our website or send me an email, info@alpinecols.com. Now, into the meat of it. It makes little sense to talk about training to do well at the Marmotte until we know what this means. So I always like to review, what does it take to do well at the Marmotte before getting into the actual training plan. So let's take a look at what happened in past years. So these are the data, I think from either 22 or 23. I can't remember now. The first person in that year was an Austrian guy called Stefan Kirchmeier, and he took you can see the official time, the overall time, and the difference between the two is the descent of the Glandon, which is not timed. Timing stops on the summit and then restarts at the bottom. Then the next two columns are the watts per kilo of the people concerned, and the VAM, which is useful if you don't have a power meter. You can find it if you do a climb on Strava. It will give you your VAM, and that's essentially proportional to your power in watts per kilo. VAM is the vitesse ascensionnelle in meters, so it means the climbing speed, the vertical climbing speed, if you will, in meters per hour. So 1300 means he climbed 1300 vertical meters in 1 hour. The 1000th position, you can see the person took 9 hours overall. Their average on the climbs was 2.8 watts per kilo, and their VAM was 750. And then for the last person in that year, he or she finished, I think it was a man, finished in just under 14 hours. Watts per kilo on the climbs, again, this is average on the major climbs, of 1.7 and VAM of 450. There were, as usual, a good 20% of the people didn't finish. And that's normal. It's more than that if the weather's bad. Now here's another presentation of the data, looking at the times on the 3 major climbs. So or 3 of the major climbs. I left off the Glandon. So how long did Stefan take on the Telegraph? 35 minutes, 60 minutes on the Galibier, and 50 minutes on Alpe d'Huez. So those are very, very impressive times during an event like the Marmotte. The 1000th person was 60 minutes, 1 hour 40, and 1 hour 30. So what does that mean? That means that if you're anywhere near the very front, in the first 10, 20, or even 50 people, you're going to be getting up the climbs in well under an hour for most of the climbs. What that means is you can go up them at a pretty high intensity. You can be quite close to your threshold on those climbs. On the other hand, if you're 1000th position or later, then you're well over an hour. Well, an hour on the Telegraph, well over an hour on the Galibier, and you're going to be in over an hour on the Alpe d'Huez for sure. That means there's no way you're anywhere near your threshold. You're going to be doing those climbs at tempo at best, you know, in zone 3. And of course, if you're bringing up the back, then it will be even lower. You're at best at in zone 2 and possibly even zone 1 for parts of the climbs. So that's worth bearing in mind. Now, coming back to my question, what does it take to achieve at least these average speeds, if you will, or those average powers? For those of you who've already seen part 1, this is a reminder, so I'll go through it quite quickly. But if you haven't seen part 1, I recommend listening to it on YouTube to gain a deeper understanding. So obviously the requirements are not the same for those at the front and those at the back. In the first case, they're only riding for 6 hours. Often that intensity is close to threshold. In the second case, they'll ride for 12 to even 14 hours at low intensities. But in all cases, you need mental strength to reach the end. You need the ability to climb and descend well at your level. You need the ability to pace yourself. And last but not least, you need the ability to eat and drink enough to fuel your ride at whichever level you're at. So your training plan needs to address all of these points. You need to practice all of these points. In part 1, I presented these general principles and the structure of the training plan at some length, so I'm going to go through it very quickly this evening, just as a reminder. So the first principle is if you want to do well at the Marmotte, you're going to have to make it a priority in your training and really to a certain extent in your life, because you're going to have to train, hard and for quite a few hours a week. Second point, be consistent. So train hard to race easy. There's no point in training very hard for a week and then doing nothing for the next 2 weeks. That's not going to work. You need to build a strong aerobic base. You need to develop your fat burning capacity. That gives, if you've got a high ability to burn fat during endurance cycling, you have a big advantage in an event like the Marmotte, because the only alternative to burning fat is burning carbohydrate, and you run out of what's in your body very quickly, and then you've got to eat it. And it's extremely difficult to consume enough. So the more you can burn fat, the better off you are. You need to build short-term muscular endurance and durability. We'll come back on that in considerable detail. Do as much climbing as possible. I know that's obviously more difficult if you live in a flat area, but make sure you've got a smart home trainer and use that to simulate climbs as much as you can. You need to increase your training load progressively. You can't increase it sharply and expect to remain at a high level. That just isn't going to work. So be very progressive about the way you build your training load. It's really preparing for the Marmotte. If someone just coming to cycling would be mad to take on the Marmotte in their first year. They should build up to it over 2, 3, or even 4 years. Recover to get stronger. You don't get stronger by training hard. You get stronger by recovering from that hard training. Training hard breaks you down. Recovery builds you back up. Monitor your readiness for high load. Of course, we'll come into that in detail a little bit later. If you take on high load when your body's not ready for it, it's a waste of time. You simply won't be able to take advantage of it. Finally, develop your technical skills to make sure that you can descend fast and safely, that you're able to follow the wheels in the peloton, and you're able to climb efficiently and economically. All right, so these principles are then brought to life in the training plan itself, which is periodized in 3 phases. The preparation or the base phase, which finishes basically now or the end of the month. Then the pre-competition phase, which runs until the middle of or the end of the first week of June. And finally, the competition or taper phase for the last 1 or 2 weeks, 10 days or so. Today, I'm focusing on the pre-competition phase. Here you can see our framework training plan, which you may have downloaded already from the Marmotte website. If not, it's there if you want it, or you can just send me an email to request it. As I've said before, this training plan is a framework, and it's not a detailed day-by-day training plan. The idea is that you take the framework and design your own training plan that will be perfectly tailored for you. Here's the second page, which provides you with a typical training week and suggested workouts during each period. Just a reminder that the harder you intend to race, the more you need to do in terms of intervals and high intensity, but never more than 2 sessions per week. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in overtraining, and you won't be doing enough base training to go the distance at the Marmotte. So let's look now at what should be in part 2 of your training plan from now to the first week in June. The key objectives or focus during this period are, first, above all, to strengthen your aerobic endurance so that you can ride hard for at least 6 hours without undue fatigue. I say ride hard for 6 hours. At the moment, you may be riding less hard for longer. 2, work on your durability, which is your ability to repeat the climbs without losing power. Ideally, you want to be able to climb Alpe d'Huez with the same power that you used on the Galibier, the Telegraph, and the Glandon at the beginning. Okay, but that's not easy. That takes a lot of training to get there. 3, it's important to simulate race conditions at least 2 or 3 times before the event. 4, add some exercises to sharpen your technical skills, such as group riding, descending, and cornering at speed. And finally, optimize your nutrition, so you're fueling your training, you're facilitating fat oxidation, and finally, you're training your gut for the large amount of carbs that you'll need to eat during the event. So those are the objectives and the focus. Now let's look at how to do it. So first, how to strengthen your aerobic endurance. This isn't complicated, really. You just need to do as many long rides as possible. What's complicated is the intensity. It needs to be below LT1, and I'll come back to that several times. The key metric on these long rides should be time and not distance. The reason is simple. If you set yourself a goal of distance, say I'm going to ride for 100 kilometers, you'll be tempted to ride faster to finish earlier, which is contrary to what you're trying to achieve here. The point of the long rides is to develop your aerobic endurance and fat burning capacity, and this is optimum at low intensity. The faster you ride, the more you'll be burning carbs instead of fat, and the more tired you'll be without additional training benefit in terms of building your aerobic endurance. So set a target of time to ride. So that might be 4 hours, it might be 5 hours, it might be 6 hours, whatever it is, set it in time and make sure you stay below that first threshold throughout the ride. Okay, for most people, that means not much above 60% of your HR max or your FTP or your critical power. Now, problem for some people is that they find these long, slow rides a bit boring. So it's important to understand why you should do them. Okay, so I'll take a short detour to talk about that. So let me begin with a quotation from Professor Sam Milan, who you may recognize as being, he's not only one of the world's foremost experts on metabolism, but he's also the principal trainer at Team UAE Emirates. And until very recently, he was Tadej Pogacar's personal trainer. So what does he say? For the past 18 years of this, I've been able to see that zone 2 training is absolutely essential to improve performance. And he really insists on this point. So for this to work, you need to, of course, to know where your zone 2 limit is. Your training zones need to be accurate. And in my experience, most people believe their zone 2 is much higher than it really is. What I'm showing here is a typical 5-zone model with the 2 physiological markers that we call thresholds. Remember that all the so-called thresholds are in fact a range, and they're certainly not constant, but they vary with your level of fitness and also with your short-term fatigue. So it doesn't, zone 2 doesn't become zone 3 when you add 1 watt to your power output. It's over a range of 10 or 15 watts that zone 2 merges into zone 3, if you like. That's the way it works. So the second threshold, critical power FTP, is pretty well known, so I'm not going to talk about it this evening. For events like the Marmotte, it's the first threshold that is actually more important. So it's also called LT1 for the first lactate threshold, VT1 for the first ventilatory threshold, or the aerobic threshold as opposed to the anaerobic. It's the top of zone 2. Now, the best way to determine it is via a lactate test. But for that, you need to go to a lab, and that's quite expensive and may not be easy. There may not be a lab near you. So there are other ways to do it. You can use the so-called talk test, which means that if you can't talk easily in complete sentences, you're going too fast. Or you can identify the point your breathing starts to increase, doing a test, what I call a breathing test on a turbo. And the way to do this is to start at a deliberately very low intensity and increase by increments of 15 watts every 10 minutes. Pay very close attention to your breathing and try to identify the moment when your breathing starts to accelerate, when you need to breathe more. It's also a good idea to read a book at the same time. And if you do, it's the moment when you start having difficulty to concentrate on the text. In zone 1, you can read easily, fully understand everything you're reading. Zone 2, a little more difficult, but you can still concentrate. Once you get into zone 3, it becomes harder, and that's a noticeable transition. So the talk test, the breathing test, or reading when you're on a turbo, all of those, if you use this step of 15 watts for every 10 minutes, you will feel that moment where, oh yeah, okay, now that's clearly different. I've passed the threshold. All right, so we've talked about aerobic endurance. The second point then is to work on your durability. So this is your capacity to make repeated efforts at medium to high intensity, or repeated climbs, if you will. The better your durability, the more likely you are to be able to stay with a good group from beginning to end of the event, and especially up the last climb to Alpe d'Huez. If your durability is weak, you'll probably lose the group you're riding with in the Maurienne Valley, and you'll certainly lose them on the Telegraph. Now, there are 3 ways to work on durability. The first is to do threshold or VO2 max interval sessions. You might, for example, do 4 by 10-minute intervals, which could be at threshold. You might do 8 by 5 minutes, which are going to be above threshold, getting close to VO2 max, or 12 by 2 minutes, which is definitely VO2 max, or maybe even slightly above. You should do at least 1 interval session per week, but again, no more than 2. The second way to work on durability is to increase the intensity near the end of a long ride when your legs are tired. So go out to do a low intensity ride of 5-6 hours, and the last hour you up the tempo and you ride relatively hard. Ride at tempos, zone 3 on a climb, ideally if you've got one handy. Otherwise, on the flat doesn't matter too much. If you're on the flat, then use the biggest ring, biggest gear, so that your cadence comes down, so it simulates climbing a little bit better. It's not perfect, but it's better than spinning at 95 RPM. Okay, and then the third way, of course, is to join a hard club ride or to participate in a race, a sportive or a Grand Fondo of some sort. So this last point also feeds into the third objective, which is race readiness and the importance of simulating the race conditions. During the last 6 to 8 weeks, you should find at least 2 or 3 opportunities to do this. Okay, don't do them every weekend, on the other hand, because they're too hard and they'll be detrimental to your training. So the easiest way may be to join a hard club ride if you're in a club where everybody's really pushing it for 3 or 4 hours. Those are great race simulations. But better still is to sign up for an actual event where the result doesn't matter and you just use it to test and experiment. So you can push harder than you normally would and see where your limits are. And that can be a great way to learn. We're lucky in France to have a very wide choice of events. Here's the list in France until mid-May, which you can find on the website velo-cyclosport.com. There are 8 great events in April, at least as many, if not more, in May. The 2 in Alpine Cols Pink have the highest amount of climbing. If you have any possibility of coming to them, they'd be good events. La Route Verte, which is in the Vosges region. So if anyone listening to me lives uh, in Belgium or in Holland or in Germany, that's quite easy to get to. And that's 164 kilometers and 2,800 meters. That's a pretty decent event. The La Clavejola is in Isère, so that's near Grenoble in the Alps. And that's a significant event. That's 150 kilometers and almost 4,000 meters. So that would be a good training event as well. If you live in the UK, I don't have the list of UK events handy, but check out what's available. There's almost certainly something you can go and do without having to cross the channel. Still under simulating race conditions, you should be aware that it sometimes rains on the Marmotte, and it can be very cold on the Galibier in particular if it does rain. And it did rain last year, so maybe we'll get lucky this year. You never know. This photo, by the way, was actually taken on the Glandon. Racing in the rain brings several additional challenges compared to racing in dry weather, so make sure you practice it. There's nothing worse than being out in the rain with poor clothing, so this is important to test until you find the best solutions for you. And the second point is bike handling, which is obviously harder on wet and slippery roads, and that needs practice too. So don't be a fair weather cyclist. Do go out and ride sometimes in the rain, because you might need that practice. Okay, now let's talk a bit about the importance of technical skills. You should be deliberately building in practice and working on improving these skills, such as climbing. Of course, climbing is technical, a lot more technical than a lot of people realize. If you want to be efficient and economic in your climbing, you need to learn the technique. Okay, so you may need some coaching help on that from a club mate or a friend or a professional. Descending obviously is another big one, particularly for people that don't live anywhere near the mountains. It's pretty hard to learn to descend if you're never in the mountains. So it's highly technical. You can gain a lot of speed and still remain totally safe when you master the technique. Not dissimilar to skiing, by the way. So learn to descend fast and you'll do much better in these events. Bunch riding, of course, you can practice almost anywhere. Very good, very useful to have that technique on the Marmotte, particularly for the two long valleys, up the Maurienne and then back down the Valley d'Oison. And there's other skills as well, like adapting your clothing, like eating and drinking on the bike. Adapting clothing might seem strange, but if you need to take off a jacket or to put a jacket back on when you're riding, if you can't do that while you're riding, you're going to have to stop. If you have to stop, it's going to take you 45 seconds to a minute and a half to pull it out, put it on, and zip it up and so on. So you've lost that amount of time. But worse than that, you've lost the people you were riding with, and that can cost you many more minutes because you're now riding with a slightly slower group a little bit behind. So it's well worth the effort of learning these skills. If you know you're weak in one or more of these areas, so try to find a coach or a club mate who can help you. But of course, if you come and join one of our camps, we'll work closely with you to help you improve those skills. So finally, let's come to nutrition. This is a very important part of your training. I'm not going to repeat everything I said on this subject in the part 1 video, so this is mainly a reminder now. The first point is to make sure you're eating enough to fuel your training. The second is to continue to develop your fat burning ability. And the third is to train your gut to absorb enough carbohydrate during the race itself. Okay, so let's look at those three in turn. First, fueling your training. When you're training hard, on the one hand, it's particularly important to eat a wide variety of the highest quality non-processed foods possible. But on the other hand, it's important to adjust the amount you eat to your energy requirements, your energy expenditure. On a long ride, you might easily expend 3,000 calories or even more, which you need to replace. So don't be tempted to take this as an opportunity to lose weight and to kind of starve yourself when you're doing your long rides. That's not a good idea. You might indeed lose weight, you probably will, but you won't gain the benefit of the training. And so you won't be in good condition to train again the next day, and you won't be in good condition for the Marmotte. So fuel your training, that's really important. Okay, now looking at fat burning. To maintain your ability to burn fat, which hopefully you've developed over the last 3 months, make sure you start your long rides at low intensity. If you start at even a moderate intensity, you kickstart your body into burning carbs rather than fat. Okay, which you really don't want to do, particularly on a long ride. Now, if you start the ride without breakfast, so in a fasted state, then stay on the safe side and don't go above 60%. It says 45, 50% on the slide. That might be a wee bit low, but certainly not above 60% of your critical power or your FTP for the first couple of hours. And then take no food for the first 2 or 3 hours. And so that will make sure that your body is burning fat. Okay, from then on, you need to start eating. From after 2-3 hours maximum, you need to start eating at least 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Okay, it's a very different approach on your tempo or your race pace rides or any rides with intervals. There you need to be properly fueled. So you can take the opportunity to train your gut to tolerate the high amounts of carbohydrates you're going to need at the race. If you're like most people, you probably rarely take more than 60 grams per hour, which is the equivalent of 2 bananas or 2 gels or 2 energy bars or any combination per hour. There's a clear advantage, however, in being able to use up to at least 90 grams, because this will help you conserve the glycogen in your muscles that you need for that final climb. So experiment with different foods and gels to see which works for you. And don't forget, you can also drink your carbs. A bottle of energy drink can include up to 30 grams or even a bit more, depending on the concentration. So what does this give you in terms of a typical training week? I'll show you here for a typical training week of 10 hours, and then in a few minutes for 20 hours. First, for the load weeks. Remember, you shouldn't do more than 2 or 3 load weeks in a row without a recovery week. 2 if you're over 50, 3 perhaps if you're under 50 is a rough guideline, but it really depends how quickly you recover. In a load week, your most important ride is the long, low intensity one that I've placed here on a Sunday. And the second most important is the midweek interval session. The third ride is then a shorter, low intensity ride. And then scattered about the week, we also put some couple of mobility sessions and a strength session, which could be, for example, on the Tuesday. And then the recovery week is you cut up the intensity, cut up probably the strength session, and reduce the volume by roughly half. Okay, so it's not a complete rest by any means, but it definitely reduces it down, gives you that chance to recover. Now, if you have 20 hours to train, you're probably either retired or on an extended break, because it's extremely hard to find 20 hours to train if you're working a normal working week. But the first thing to note is that you can only sustain this level of training if you're already used to it. If you're currently training 10 hours a week, it should take at least 3 months, maybe more, to be able to sustain 20 hours per week. You have to build up very progressively. Otherwise, you're going to overtrain, you're going to create injury, you're going to be in all sorts of a mess. You can, of course, go do at least 20 hours or even up to 30 in a single week on a training camp, and that's fine. That's not an issue. But you can't sustain it week in, week out. Okay, so for a week you can get away with it, but then you must take, the following week's going to be very largely recovery and very largely doing nothing in order to for your body to recover. If you could train this much, then the most important ride is still the long, low intensity ride on the Sunday, followed by the interval session, which I've placed here on the Tuesday, the tempo ride on Thursday, and 2 or more low intensity rides on Friday and Saturday. Of course, this is just a suggestion. You arrange your week how it works for you. But complete those with an off the bike strength session, which could be on the Wednesday, and then a couple of mobility sessions, which could be on Monday and Friday. The recovery week, again, no intensity work during that week, but keep up a decent volume of low intensity rides. You can still do a strength session because it's only 15 minutes or so, and that works okay. That's not going to, it shouldn't affect your recovery. But don't do a high intensity session, a high intensity interval session. That makes no sense during a recovery week. Now, to help you train properly and consistently, here are some simple research-based tips that have been proven to work. First of all, write your weekly plan out by hand. So beginning of each week or the end of the last week, write it out by hand. Use active verbs to describe what you're going to do. Make it measurable. And if you use visual reminders like Post-its that you stick on the fridge or on the window or whatever, renew them every day. If you don't do that, they become part of the scenery and you no longer see them. This is, the research has proven that. Okay, so here's an example of a weekly plan written out by hand using active verbs. So ride for 6 hours at low intensity, do 1 30-minute leg strength session. So using active verbs, everything's measurable, and you can stick that where you can see it, and then again renew it every day, or as you tick them off. Now, but importantly, and I mentioned this at the beginning, are you ready for a hard session? Before doing a hard session, it's important to realize that you should only do it if your body's ready for it. If you do a hard session when your body's not ready for it, meaning that you feel unusually tired, with stiff legs, sore muscles, or if you feel unusually stressed, or all of those together, then the hard session will literally be a waste of time because your body will not be able to create the adaptations you need. I don't want to go into the detail of that, but basically what's happening is that when you're very tired, when you're stressed and so on, there's a bunch of hormones circulating in your body which stop you from rebuilding muscle and rebuilding strength. Those hormones are dealing with the stress and so on, but they cannot, they stop your body from repairing and recovering. So you're wasting your time to do a hard intensity session. Maybe you can do something very light, but definitely nothing hard. So how can you tell if you're in that state? Well, the professionals and some serious amateurs have tools for measuring states of fatigue and stress, but honestly, I'd classify them as marginal gains and they're not that easy to use. So all you really have to do is note how you feel on these 3 scales shortly after you get up in the morning, and then use the results to adapt your program. Be honest with yourself, especially before an intense interval session or a very long ride. The warning signs for me would be readings of 5 or more. When in doubt, it's probably better to be careful. You can still train easy. If you were planning a high intensity session and your scores are 5 or 6s on 2 or 3 of these, then yeah, maybe you can go out and do a 1 to 2 hour low intensity ride, but you might be better off just taking a rest day rather than adding extra stress to your system. Okay, so to summarize on this point, you should monitor and adjust your training load using feelings, quantified by the scales we just saw. Back off when needed. Don't get macho and ignore the indicators. And normally it's enough to replace a planned hard session either by an easy one or by complete rest, and then reschedule the hard session for a day or 2 later. Okay, finally, and as always, last but not least, I always like to spend a few minutes talking about off-the-bike work, because this is important if you want to be a good cyclist. You should be planning on 1 or 2 sessions per week, ideally guided by a strength and conditioning coach with experience in cycling. And the goal in this phase is not so much to increase your strength, but to maintain it. Okay, remember to be cautious in what you're doing to limit the risk of injury. You really do need to know what you're doing, which is why I talk about having a strength and conditioning coach. The second part is mobility and flexibility, which are really important to work on if your main sport is cycling, which it probably is if you're going to be riding the Marmotte. And especially it's important as you get older, from about 40 years on. So I suggest 2 to 3 10 to 20-minute sessions per week using techniques like Pilates or yoga. And again, learning correct technique is vital. So choose a practitioner who knows cycling and only takes small groups so they can actually look at you and see what you're doing. Finally, you should complement regularly with other physical activities such as walking, running, swimming, or whatever you like. And the reason is if you sit at your computer all day and cycling is your only sport, you risk building up serious imbalances and soft tissue problems over time. So you must do some other stuff. And one simple idea, if you do sit at the computer most of the day, is to set an alarm to remind you to get up every hour and move your body just for 2 or 3 minutes. Do a few squats, a few stretches, just walk around the office for a couple of minutes, and then come back. And your body will really be thankful to you for that. All right, so there you have it. If you follow these tips, you should be ready for a good race on June the 23rd at the Marmotte. I remind you that our next conference, the final talk I'll be giving, is on the 5th of June, your best result on the day. So it's devoted to the race itself and how to ride it for the best, fairly obviously. So do join me for that. It'll be a pleasure to see you again. And so that's it for this evening. It's up to you. Take this advice, adapt your own training plan, and above all, follow it. Of course, if you'd like some professional support, so you're really on top form on the day itself, we can help you in 2 complementary ways. The first one, check out our camps on our website. There's one in Corsica at the end of April when the weather should be nice, and we'll be in the mountains in Corsica, so good way to build some distance and some climbing. And the other one, much closer to the event, just a week before it, is our camp in Savoie in the Alps, which will include some reconnaissance of the Étape du Tour. I only have a couple of places left on that, so if you are interested, be very quick. Finally, of course, there's an individual coaching contract. You can contact us for that to benefit from one-on-one coaching and advice on a daily basis. So there you go. You can also send me a question anytime. I'm happy to answer. Thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy your training, and good luck for that, and good luck for the race. Hope to see you there.